is René Gerrets. I'm an associate professor here in the Department of Anthropology. My role comes with my title. So I teach, I do research, I do management type activities. I love that question because anthropology profoundly changed me. It profoundly changed how I did my research, but also how I look at the world. And it's the anthropology allows you to scratch beyond the surface, to go deeper, and to see all the interconnections. And I think that's really one of the most powerful things that anthropological training and anthropological thinking has brought me. Your question actually brings me to kind of one of the red threads in my research over the past many years. And I've been very interested in the backstage business that is necessary for the front stage business to happen. So if you want to speak with Irving Goffman, for instance, I mean, what kind of gets downplayed, right? Because he talks about the front stage business that is necessary to produce face or whatever. I'm particularly interested in the backstage business that has to disappear from social reality in order to kind of make it look as if the front stage business, front stage phenomena happen by themselves. And anthropology gives you the tools to study all of that. That which is critical to phenomena in social reality, for them to happen the way they do. Yet, as part of that, a lot has disappeared. And those phenomena I've been interested in studying over the past 2 decades. And anthropology is the discipline that gives you the tools to study that. Sure, it's my pleasure to talk about that because I met various mentors in life who had a major impact on my career and my life path. And the first were really critical, and that's Dorothy Nelkin and Bambi Shefflin. And I wrote my first master's thesis under their supervision. They really opened up anthropology to me, and they suggested I should do a PhD in anthropology, and I was very surprised by that. That's also why I sometimes call myself an accidental anthropologist, because it was actually they who said I could do it. I wasn't convinced. And then embarked on a PhD in anthropology at NYU. And Bambi Shefflin stayed my mentor all along. She's a linguistic anthropologist who opened my mind to the relationship between language and culture and social life out there. And in fact, we're very much in touch today, and she remains a mentor in my life. And then at NYU, Rene Rapp and Tom Bileman, they were also my mentors. They profoundly shaped how I thought. And I'm very grateful to them about that. And they're still kind of sitting on my shoulders in ways when I do my contemporary works. It's as if I'm in dialogue with them. And then another colleague who I met in Germany when I wrote up my PhD, Richard Rottenberg, he was deeply steeped in social theory and very, very kind of had a very deep knowledge of that. And his thinking and the exposure I got there to social theory, in addition to what I learned at NYU, had a profound impact on me, and his work still very much influences my work today. So, and then maybe to conclude, my colleague Patricia Kingori, she's a professor at Oxford University, and we met when we were doing our PhD research in East Africa. She worked in Kenya, I worked in Tanzania, and we've basically been sparring partners ever since. And it's with her that even 2 weeks ago I was in London visiting her, and we go for these long walks where we talk about stuff that interests us. And she's very much been one of my mentors in life, and I'm very, very grateful for that too. One moment that I cherish is when about a month ago I was able to give my first talk about my last project, which I called the Fake Project, in the Department of Anthropology here, because the start of that project was derailed in a way I could never have foreseen. what happened is that one of the colleagues with whom we got the funding for the project basically decided she wanted to steal, to take over my part of the project, and use the project coach who we had hired to prevent any problems from happening between their co-investigators. She used the project coach to engineer situations that could make me look bad. Now, obviously, this is not something that I had any preparation for dealing with. I had no idea what was happening. I was actually on sabbatical in New York City in the department where I had done my PhD. And this was all happening backstage. And it's thanks to dear friends, including my colleagues and the Global Health Institute, that we were able to thwart this attempted coup d'etat. That's what it was. And so for me, being able, and then soon after that, COVID hit, and starting up a new project during COVID in Tanzania is very, very difficult because it's very much a face-to-face society, and if you can't travel, there's a whole lot of things you cannot do. And then some personal health problems hit, which also kind of delayed some project activities. So in the end, I mean, setting up a large project actually requires a lot of input. It also requires a lot of support from all kinds of people. And I was very, very grateful also for the support in my department here to kind of make it to the end. And not only that, to be able to generate very interesting research findings that I'm in the middle of presenting now and writing up. But it was really a tough ride for much of the way. And when you start studying your PhD, I mean, I didn't know any of this could happen. I actually entered science with the idea that we're trying to generate knowledge and do good, and generate knowledge that can help mankind and some of the problems, and also push the field forward. But what happened to me during this project was really inconceivable to me. But then, as a project leader, you're supposed to come up with solutions and try to salvage what you have. So standing here in the department, I was really, really happy also to share this as a warning to younger colleagues. We need to be prepared for this and talk to colleagues about this, because this is a bit of an elephant in the room that we don't have a lot of discussion about, yet it does happen. The world is changing rapidly and in ways we find hard to foresee at the moment. One of the changes that struck me is we're shifting away from a rules, a regulations, a laws-based system to something different. Right? The post-World War II order, laws and regulations and order played an important role. And as part of that, we also see a shift away from the importance of facts. I mean, we're entering what's being called a post-truth era. Misinformation, disinformation, which are of all times, really acquire a different form of power, very much so, right? And this is where Internet 2.0 has made a lot possible, because anybody who has access to the Internet can present their version of what they think matters. So in the domain of health, which is one of the areas I work on, this is having major consequences, because that's kind of diminishing the power of authoritative scientific knowledge, which for a long time was very important in determining what matters in health. And we see that, for instance, disinformation, misinformation is having an ever greater role, is playing an ever greater role in matters of health. And as anthropologists, we are very well equipped in studying that. I'm not sure if we find answers to that, but people come from their different perspectives. And since we try to make sense of what people say, how they understand what they put out there, this is something we can form a bridge between the expert communities who kind of reason from their ways of knowing versus how other people perceive problems out there. My current project is in ethical review at the moment, here at the University of Amsterdam. And after I get approval here, I'm going to send it to the Zanzibar authorities. That's where the project takes place. And the project basically looks at another medical anthropological problem, and that's the spread of what is called antimicrobial drug resistance. And we've now entered a time when many drugs that are used to treat infections are becoming increasingly ineffective because the bugs that the drugs are supposed to treat develop resistance against these bugs. So this is affecting all kinds of diseases, bacterial infections, malaria, tuberculosis, viruses. For this project, we're going to look at meat production in Zanzibar, because what we've learned is that the preventative use of antibiotics to produce meat as quickly and cheaply as possible has increased antibiotic use, but that happens largely under the radar, and in many countries, and Tanzania is no exception, antibiotic use among humans and other users, including veterinary users, are regulated by different agencies. So that it's as if they're separate compounds. However, resistance genes actually, they don't differentiate between animals and humans. So they travel between species. And what we see in Zanzibar is that this problem is spreading. Human antibiotics are relatively well controlled. Animal antibiotics are less well regulated. And there's huge demand to produce cheap animal protein. So you see this expanding meat production happening. So the upscaling of meat production. In this project, there's also players from the global north, where in the EU this problem is quite well under control, the UK as well. But the companies that are based in the Netherlands and in the UK sell medicines down there as well. We found those compounds. So that's what we're going to study for this new project. We're going to look at the socio-economic drivers in meat production that kind of in the shadows help generate antimicrobial drug resistance, because the national policy focuses mostly on humans and human antibiotic use, human medicine use. So this is a classic example of what we call a One Health problem, where you have to look across living creatures and across policy domains to address it. It's just a pilot study, and our Tanzanian colleagues asked us to do it because they don't have enough social science research capacity. And that's why we're going to set that up. And we hope the pilot study will lead to a larger study. So how we envision this project is, first of all, I work with Tanzania-based research assistants. And my oldest research associate I've been working with since I did my doctoral research there. So we've been working together for 20 years. And we're extremely close. I mean, we're like family. And Bonde is his name. He's a very good ethnographer. And then as part of my last project, I've also worked with other people who will join this new project as well. So how we do this project, it's actually a social lives of medicine focused project. We're focusing mostly on veterinary practices and particularly the medicines, the medical compounds that are part of veterinary practice. So we're going to go to farms, chicken farms. Chicken is the most widely consumed animal meat in Zanzibar. There's also some cattle, but the soil doesn't lend itself so much for cattle rearing in Zanzibar. Chicken is important, and chicken production is expanding very rapidly. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to look at the shops that sell these products that are used to create healthy chickens or healthy cows. Maybe goats as well, but goats tend to rummage around. They eat anything. They need very little food support. And we're going to go to farms, and we're going to talk to doctors, because there's traveling doctors around for when animals face health issues. And obviously we'll talk with the keepers of animals and so on and so forth. But we're not going to look at human antibiotic use. It's really animal-centered. And then in the Netherlands and the UK, we're going to look at companies that produce this stuff. And now it's extremely hard. I will do this research. It's very hard to get access to pharmaceutical companies, right? That's why you'll find hardly any ethnographies of pharmaceutical companies. It's a classic Laura Nader studying up type problem when pharmaceutical companies are very good at sealing themselves off from scrutiny from the outside world. So in a way, this is what's shaping the project. But most of it will be done ethnographically in Zanzibar by following the medicines, the animals, and the places where the animals are reared, and the humans that interact with both the medicines and the animals. There are certain things we cannot mention and we cannot do. And that's because of the political sensitivity, as you mentioned, Morgan. So that's very true. What I've agreed with my Zanzibari collaborators is that for us it's also very important to think about sociologically, in a social science perspective, about how you can study these problems. We have complete leeway to do that. In terms of the publications, we have to be very sensitive also to national priorities. And in fact, the Tanzanian authorities, they have to give permission for publications. So with any publication that contains quantitative data, they have full authority. They're a little less strict about qualitative publications. But what it means is that we're going to have to share our research findings, run them by our colleagues, and hopefully we'll be able to write up the research findings with our colleagues as well. And in a way, there's going to be a splitting. I mean, what is needed locally, right? Because locally, there's, as I say, there's a rather big shortage of good social science data on this problem. And the government is very interested in learning more about this. So we'll do workshops, we'll write reports probably. Mainland Tanzania, one of the anthropologists who studied this is one of the stakeholders in the project, so we work with him. He can also filter the information to the Tanzanian government in terms of what they can do and then how they handle the more sensitive issues. And then my colleague in the UK, Steve Hinchliffe, and I, we both co-financed the project, and we're interested more in the social science side of this. And as we digest our findings and we start thinking about social science papers, which will be much more about the global political, economical drivers kind of pushing this problem forward into a particular direction, right? Because expansion of meat production is everywhere. It hinges on rearing of particular types of animals that are genetically engineered or that are selected so they can process high energy food, so they can kind of mature in a very short period. It's about this logic of industrialized meat production, and then the global kind of trading networks and policies, all this depends on. So we'll probably write about those topics because there are many international actors involved. And that too will have will require the approval of Zanzibari authorities. So we may have to anonymize in particular ways, although it is hard to anonymize island communities, right? But we'll think about that. And maybe a final thing, Steve and I are part of this British Academy funded project. That's actually, we're using our funding to support this. And as part of this group of colleagues, we're studying what's called just transitions and antimicrobial resistance, because this problem of antimicrobial resistance is also an equity and justice problem, right? The people who are in the weakest position tend to suffer the most. The very rich tend to find ways around or out of these problems, and the consequences are less severe for them by and large. So we also will share our findings as part of this network where our colleagues who are from the social sciences and humanities and who are thinking around these justice and equity issues in relation to antimicrobial resistance will also take our findings aboard and then do their thing with it, right? They will process it the way they deem fit. So those are ways we think about our project as we're moving forward. How I understand the UvA Anthropology department, I wasn't trained there, I was trained at New York University, but when I moved here, I had already learned that this is a department where there are some strongly developed theoretical traditions, but there's also a culture of letting 1,000 flowers bloom. It's different from other departments I was aware of, where certain very dominant traditions were very dominant, and there wasn't a lot of room for that here. One field that I have strong affinity to is the study of medicines, and it was spearheaded by Jacques van der Gees, who is our emeritus professor of medical anthropology here. He and his former PhD student Anita Hardon set up this field of study called the social lives of medicine, which also became active outside of this university. And actually my current research is speaking to that field when I'm doing research about how people understand fake, falsified medicines. It speaks to that tradition, which examined how medicines are at once biological, pharmacological, but also social and political. And that's a field of study that's been happening here at the university for at least 30 years and has provided a unique body of scholarship that I'm proud of. Yeah, in terms of the seminar culture we have here, it was certainly different from NYU, where I was trained, or at the Max Planck Institute in Halle, Germany, where I wrote up my PhD, because again, this culture of letting 1,000 flowers bloom, and then that mixed with a widespread dedication to informality in the Netherlands, and also university culture more generally, makes for very open kinds of seminar-related discussions and questions here compared to other places. In the Max Planck, it was much more hierarchical because that's how things were run. So first the big professors would speak, and then that was the pattern, and then the less senior people would say their thing, and PhD students, as I was at the time there, tended to wait to say their thing. These types of dynamics don't really work here at the University of Amsterdam. It's like who raises their hands first can say their thing, and it's usually very open and supportive. There's also no need to kind of show off how much you know theoretically about a topic, which is another culture that I've encountered. And people can ask whatever they're interested in. Of course, people appreciate a smart question when it can happen, but there's also room for questions that some people may be less open to. And that's really part of the seminar culture I enjoy a lot here. Regarding anthropology in the Netherlands, we have entered a period of interesting times as well, because the policy has shifted with the new government. The government has embarked on, how do I say this politely, a Netherlands first kind of approach, if you want to use that language of today. I think for anthropology, there's a lot to be studied here. I'm not against that, right? You can work in your own country, which I rarely do. But that seems to be one shift which will affect the field in the future. Because if, for instance, anthropology in Amsterdam at the bachelor's level has to switch to a Dutch language program, that obviously has consequences for internationalization, because our education has been shifted over to English language, with Dutch as a possibility. In terms of research, I'm not so sure what kind of consequences there will be. I would think that both policy decisions, for instance in the Netherlands, the current government decided to do away mostly with global health and sexual reproductive health as spear points, which they have been for many, many years, and which allowed kind of building out of a lot of research capacity in those domains. That seems to be changing now. We don't know what's going to take its place. Thankfully, there are European funding structures that Dutch, Netherlands-based researchers can fall back on. We have good collaborations across the European continent. I think the shifts in the United States, the consequences of Trump policy decisions, we still need to figure out what the consequences are. But for instance, we know that anything that uses the word DEI may be effective if it uses American funding. So I think in many regards, we've entered uncharted waters in terms of both research but also education. But I'm very confident that my very skilled colleagues will find a way of navigating those waters.